Hey Marco,
Hey, Michael.
how you be?
Pretty good.
It looks like a nice day there from the
It
angle I see.
it is a beautiful, sunny, warm day.
Yeah.
It was just a tad cooler about 2 minutes ago. So this might. I have like two trees here, and
Yeah.
the sun is right in between them.
Ah.
And I had a few more leaves in between the sunlight and me,
Oh,
just
that's
a
where
little
the
while ago.
2 minute. Oh, the sun moved just enough, or
Just enough, yeah. I think if I were to wait it out, maybe another 15 minutes. Uh,
uh, I see.
Otherwise, I'll shift over there. But for
Yeah.
now, I think these will be uh, required equipment for the call.
Yeah. And they look good on you. They look good on you.
Thank you.
I don't have to use my pink headphones because my roommate is gone, and so I can use the speakers. I only have to do that when he's home because that way he's not hearing two voices get excited.
Yeah, I imagine that could be a bit distracting.
Yeah. And how's the other part of your household issues?
The the basement issues, do you
Yeah,
mean?
yeah, the basement. Yeah, yeah.
Well, we still haven't done anything about
Oh,
it, and it's not an emergency. Our toilet is flushing,
oh,
and there's no water really coming in. It hasn't been very. We've had some storms, but it hasn't really been rainy. And so I've been in the process of have interviewing contractors
mm-hmm.
and trying to, I guess, put together the right balance or the right mix that's going to be economical, because half
Sure.
the work is just excavation.
Yeah,
It's going to be, there's some concrete going all around the area that needs to be accessed, and it all needs to be dug out and then put back. And and because of our house the way it is, we have a very narrow lot. It's
yeah.
kind of long, but it's narrow, so there actually isn't room for a machine to come in. So it
Oh,
all needs to be done by hand.
oh,
And
ouch.
that's really where basically half the cost is
Yeah,
manual labor to
yeah.
excavate. My neighbor here, Jose, he's done, he's helped me out with a number of projects before. He may help out with this too,
Mm,
and or it may be somebody else.
yeah,
There's a company that they you know they I reached out to them. They called me back. We never set up a time, and then we kept playing phone tag. And then he called me on Sunday morning, and then he called me again on Sunday night. So he seems to be trying to catch up,
yeah,
but I didn't even answer the phone. I was
yeah.
like, I'm not dealing with this today,
Yeah,
uh, and we'll see. I'm not in a rush. I want to make sure we don't, that we do it right, that we don't spend more than we have to, and that at the end of it, like, the problem is solved
yeah.
and we can just forget about it.
Yeah.
Not forget about the house. I mean, it's always going to need some care, and there are more projects to do. And
Right, right.
especially with an older house, um, as with any body that ages, things break down. And
Yeah,
so
right.
there's care and attention, required. Uh, but I'm not. I haven't been too worried. There's times I've been stressed. I was stressed when the toilet backed up because we weren't ready
Oh,
to
yeah,
do work.
that's a major when that happens. You can't help but all hands on deck, kind of thing.
Yeah, on the poop deck.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's interesting that I've been reading about different things of how well do we understand how we're taking care of our waste, not just in terms of oil or anything, but human waste and where it's going and what it does.
Well, back when we read Peter Sloterdijk, he devotes a whole chapter. I think it's in Bubbles, but it might have been in the next one, Globes, to the role of human waste in the formation of cities and communities. Because
Yeah, right.
there was a time when, before indoor plumbing, and if you had a sufficient concentration of human people in a limited environment, it had to go somewhere, right?
Right.
So I know that a lot of cities had outdoor sewers, and like in London, it was wretched. Like New York City was wretched. New York City had horses, so not only did you have human waste, but you had animal waste everywhere.
Exactly.
And you know, we've obviously solved those problems like on that that civic scale, but it's still, you know, it still can become a problem, like, you know, for an individual, like for a family.
Yeah,
Like us.
in this context, they were actually using that, everything you said, as probably a way that we've over time, that's a aspect of disassociating from our body by, taking for granted, you know, other systems that take care of that without us thinking, unless you have an emergency like you do.
That's right. Yeah, it's part of like the sanitization of existence, I think. And
Yeah.
I mean, that was part of also what Sloterdijk was pointing to, is that places had a smell that was particular to that place and to the people, you know, who lived there, because it was not separated out and you know, septically kind of channeled, you know, away into this unknown you know, big machinery that takes care of it all for us all. So it was really just part of us.
Yeah.
And, you know, of course, like even individual houses have a smell. And I remember
Yes.
when I was a kid, in the good sense, like often, usually it's not sewage, hopefully, but like I remember when I would go over to, I had a friend whose family was from India, and their house had the strongest smell, and I could always associate it.
Yeah.
And I imagine that our house may have had a smell that was just totally normal to me, and it was some mix of Italian and, like, you know, Salvadorian food.
Sure.
So yeah, we don't really get to smell each other in the digital. That's one thing that's totally filtered out of our experience.
Well, and again, it's when we come to that, any sense, I think, especially smell, we mainly gravitate to what, that isn't pleasant. We gravitate when actually, working outdoors, like, and stuff, and being maintenance and stuff. I ran across smells that weren't pleasant, but there was a spectrum. I mean, there were some days that, especially in springtime, you get a waft of, I love the mix of orange blossom and jasmine trees together, and it leaves a memory of a love affair I had a long time ago in San Diego.
Oh, wow.
But when I worked at Lake Paris during the summer, I had to pump chemi toilets. I had to pump them because they had to be emptied. And so, and the best time to pump them is in the morning, not in the afternoon when the heat is there, because then the smell is just all over the place.
Yeah, I believe that. I'm just going to take a moment to feel the heat of the sun on me.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
And I'm also looking at the fan there. You kind of have your own inner sun inside the house.
Yeah. Just a minute. I'm going to shut off that light. I usually remember that. I forget that.
I once kind of fell in love with orange blossoms as well. They weren't from an orange tree. They were literally orange blossoms. But I didn't.
Oh, wow.
I was in Nicaragua.
Uh-huh.
And I wanted to write a poem, and I knew that there was a poem, and it had something to do with orange blossoms. And it was because there were these trees around that had these bright, beautiful orange blossoms, and something about them stood out for me in the whole experience, and my mind latched onto it as the thing, like the key. Like, if I just keep my focus on those, or bring them to mind again and again, somehow the poem will come out of it. And I remember trying to write about orange blossoms, and like literally trying to kind of extract the poem, and it wasn't working. Nothing would come from it. And it wasn't until like one morning, very early in the morning, I used to get up and meditate, because I was part of a volunteer group, and we had a team there, and
Mhm.
we were working early in the morning outside
Mm.
and doing construction work. And I didn't grow up doing that kind of manual labor. I didn't work with
Mm.
tools or things like
Okay.
that. I mean, I did my bicycle and I fixed things like small
Mhm.
things, but like my dad wasn't a handyman type. He
Okay.
was
Okay.
an accountant, so he
Oh,
worked
okay.
in an office. And then, you know, I was educated to be mental,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
and also to hire people. Like you would hire somebody to do something that you don't know how to do. Like in my
Okay.
household, like that was
Mhm.
the underlying kind of communication or the framework.
Yeah.
Um, so anyway, like being in Nicaragua, uh, like all it just took sort of like content, like bringing something to mind again and again and again. And then finally
Mhm.
one morning, it broke open and a totally different thing came through. Had nothing to do with orange blossoms. It was like a lot more. It was a lot more personal. It was political. It was
Ah,
historical.
wow.
But it's like the orange, like that, like prompt from that natural prompt was what almost allowed the mind to break out of its mental
Yeah.
mode, its kind of
Yeah.
mental way of um, abstracting the world or relating to the world.
Mhm.
So I mean, we just ended up talking about, you know, sense and, you
Yeah.
know, memory, and you know, you mentioned your orange blossoms, and it was
Yeah.
mixed with
Jasmine.
jasmine
Yeah.
and the memory of an old love affair, because that's kind of what that time in Nicaragua was for me. It was like falling in love with not a particular person or a particular, I mean,
Mhm.
definitely a particular place.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
and yeah, and I've kind of led me to reminisce about that time, you know, much
That's
the way
nice.
that smells and images
Yeah.
like
That's nice. I like
bring
the
back
way
memory.
you used it, that it seemed to have been a prompt, even though it led to all this other thing. You still recognize it as a prompt, and it was a seed that grew into something else. The
Yeah,
the image that you painted of the orange blossom, you know.
yeah, and then we also had latrines, and so we that's where uh, yeah, there were some, you know, interesting experiences one might have in
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
in a latrine like that. We had a group. It was there were 12 in our group, and we shared 2 latrines, and we were
Oh.
gringos mostly,
Uh-huh.
so not always adapted to the local water and food
Mm.
and so forth.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so there were multiple within our group famous incidences of, let's just say, like explosive types of events from various
Yeah.
apertures
Yeah. Yeah.
in those spaces.
Yeah.
And like
Yeah.
you really get to, I mean, you get to know people,
Well,
and you
yeah.
get to like like unite with them in,
Hmm.
I think, a way that is difficult to replicate, like in other contexts, in contexts that are more sanitized.
Yeah. It reminds me of I forget what his name was. He wrote the five love languages. I think he has a Christian background, but I love to. This one thing he paints is, if you want to get to know people, go on a road trip and go camping. Then you'll really know. It's kind of like that's a testing ground. If you can be under, not necessarily adverse, but constantly changing situations. You know, the only control you have is, well, we're going to decide what we're going to do today, and we're not on a schedule because we're not in the city. you know
Yeah, it's kind of like how bad do you stink under stress?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I want to know how bad you stink under stress. Yes. Yeah. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to apply that under certain circumstances when it came to my love life, because I let infatuation not infatuation blinded that test element that I should bring when being infatuated with somebody that I wanted to get to know.
So did that not work out, that Orange Blossom Jasmine Love?
It did not work out, but it's one of the fondest memories. There's fondest memories of learning how to be with love, even when it changes.
Hmm.
Because she was an amazing person at the time. This was back in the 80s. She was an amazing person. I was 26, and I was just coming into my my own relationship to love, and especially sexual things and that. And we had a lot of good times, but I had to. It's one of those things where you realize, okay, you begin to recognize how much differences you have that can't maybe be worked through.
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely kind of a training ground. I think that happens around like love and the heart. The 20s, of course, it's different for everybody, and I think it's become different for different generations too. And as culture has changed, we have a longer adolescence. I think we have a longer young adulthood than our forebears did.
Mm-hmm.
But it took a few tries for me until at least with one person. With one person, at least this long, like we've figured out how to coexist peacefully.
That's good.
Lovingly. Imperfectly, for sure.
I'm glad you brought that in based on my when I posted.
But it's certainly a practice, and I think it's, for me, has been one of the most profound practices, because I think, like, as I think about identity, like, what do I identify with, like, what do I feel, what defines me in a way, or my personality or my identity. And I'm thinking about this in context of a number of other discussions, like in the the wider in our wider spheres. But lover is one of them. Like I feel that I'm a lover, and
that's good.
And that's something that I do, and that's something that, like, somebody, like, one almost could choose that, could say, that's how I want to be in the world. That's how I would want to identify if I have to have an identity. And it's not that, it's not like a form, like, obviously you can't put that, or you could put it on your business card, I suppose. Actually, I knew somebody who put that on his business card, and that may be where it comes from. It was like, I won't say his name. Save him. But it was his name on one side, and on the other side, lover. And it's there. It's like as much like a maybe calling as any other type of endeavor, like artist or scientist or.
I don't mean to interrupt, but as you're talking, the person that comes to mind is Leonard Cohen.
Yeah.
Leonard Cohen fits that description to me in his poetry, because so much of his poetry is around love and with women, but it also gets stretched out about a lot of things in his 85 years.
Yeah, you get to hear like his heart going like going through its own process, of learning. Like learning, yearning, right? Weeping, cry. That's, I think, like, I feel like his music, and you could hear it in his voice too. It comes from that rib cage. It comes from that sonorous space. I keep coming back to that too, like, because I'm not a lot of things. so like, what am I, and what do I want, and then what are the consequences of choosing one path or another? You could choose sort of the path of the heart. You could sort of choose more of a head or mental oriented path, like to be a knower, and to emphasize that quality, or to be like somebody who accomplishes things in the world, the more like hands oriented, to be a doer, like to see your effects in some way, to leave a mark. And like just in the sort of broad archetypal terms, our energies are kind of organized along these axes, right?
Mhm.
So, I mean, what would it mean? What does it mean to exist as a lover, to love?
Yeah.
Like, and, you know, one can love a person. There's a lot of, like, it's really big, but it's, I don't know. I'm just wondering about it. Maybe you have some
Well, and
insight.
I like the way you stretch it out, because I think you can take any one archetype and it eventually it breaks open, and you see how it has tentacles and everything. Like you just said, you can be lover can be just the umbrella, but what's that mean? I mean, some people focus on, you know, a lover of women, you know, and that's typically how we kind of, you know, in the sexual sense. But, you know, philosophy, the word philosophy means lover of wisdom. You know what I'm saying is that to break open that whatever we identify and know that it's not necessarily, from my experience, it doesn't just fit the original intent of identifying with it. That's what comes from it. That's what I feel, because, you know, I've been a lover of women and I still love women, but I've been a, this is probably just, in a sense, I'm a lover of love.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'll just go that far. I love love, but at 65, I understand that means, like Leonard Cohen, the raw honesty of what, that's a spectrum. It totally forces you to break through idealizing love, but yet not necessarily totally abandoning ideals, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
And some people say God is love.
I grew up with that, and to me, to me, it works only in the sense that the the word God, when I put it with love, there's no image of an old man in the sky. You know, it leaves that behind.
Is there still that residue? Because I still have that residue, you know, that
Well,
sort of like cultural like image.
yeah, I still do too, and that's interesting that you bring that up. Um, I still have that image, but and you know, I think Infinite Conversations has helped me fine tune this feeling I've had. I still have the image as a workable, partial understanding that of relating to something bigger than me, because my parents were bigger than me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's kind of in my bones, that original sense of being with forces that are bigger than me, that are meant to care for us, and there's a spectrum of how that goes about, and there's a lot of reasons that I can't even, there's too many of why sometimes that doesn't go right. But all of us, I like the fact that you actually came out that last time, that I think being and love is traumatic. Let's get real. If we want to deepen our love, I think we have to have a broken heart, and that's part of love. Love has a traumatic edge to it. I mean, that's my basis right now for what I've been through. I haven't lost my ability to love, but through trauma, I've had to reorganize how I do that. It forces me to reorganize how I do love, because of, I've had trauma with my physical. I went through a divorce twice. I was in love with a woman twice, and we divorced twice. And people go, "What's wrong with you, Mike?" And my only answer, and it's just a smart ass answer, I'm a slow learner. You know,
Maybe
I
there's a lot to learn.
and I still love her in a way. I haven't stopped loving her, and we have 2 kids, but it's not just because of the kids, Marco. It's because if I didn't have her in my life and what I went through, even the traumatic part, it wasn't all trauma, but with the trauma, I would be who I am. You take her out of my life, I'd be a completely different person, with kids or not.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the way I really try to own how I'm trying to work with my experience of trying to be a good, loving person.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that you know, one of the things that we could expand a little bit for a moment. Kathy is a big part of that, but I really took my loving deeper when my children came into my life.
Mm-hmm.
And so we talk about that archetype of father, or let's just say parent to child. It's an archetype to me of caretaker to infinite, but it's to an infant, but it's a kind of archetypal edge of finite to infinite.
Mm-hmm.
But the archetype is put in human terms.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. In a way, like, the parents. This is also assuming certain cultural constructs,
Yeah, exactly.
like the nuclear family, for example. So just put that,
Yes.
check. We know.
Yeah, check that
out. Like that nuclear family,
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of a bubble, right? It's like a filter bubble between the finite and the infinite. And who said, was it Eliot or Auden? Man can only take so much reality.
Probably Huggins.
Well, I think we have to grow into the infinite.
Yes,
right?
Yes.
And we come with that spark. Certainly, the children bring that in full display, right? The spark of the infinite. But it's a spark that, left to its own, would die without a supportive environment.
Yes.
Or in a oppressive or a dysfunctional environment, will act in unpredictable ways. It could go into hiding. It could become evil. It can, or it could break through. It could become even stronger. For overcoming, barriers and traumas that may occur to it in its formative or in its embodying initial phases of embodiment, being born and growing up.
Right.
And so I think, part of the other cultural baggage, even when we talk about love, is that too has cultural meaning for us, using that word in this year 2019, that is really tied to a Christian tradition, which cultivated that ideal, and an example, like in the symbol of Christ, of what some kind of ultimate or authentic expression of love should be. But that's particular to this, our civilization, and other traditions have different ways of relating to whatever it is that word and that symbol or that concept sort of is about. Plato comes to mind. He in the Symposium, which is dialogue on love, or I guess they didn't call it love, it would have been eros. He describes an ascent of love, or an evolution or development of love from the in his cosmology, lower arenas of activity like sex.
You're saying like eros to agape?
Eros, right, exactly. Well, eros from the physical to the spiritual, or from the concrete to the forms, to the ultimate truths, the good, true, and the beautiful. and love being the force like that drives or compels or moves, the sort of motive force for going from just wanting to reproduce, like to wanting to explore each other's individuality and our life stories and our souls, and to the love of wisdom, to the love of some kind of mystical understanding of it. That's what he describes as far as like the evolution of love. And I like that. I know that there are problems with it. There are problems with that kind of, if it becomes hierarchical and you think that spiritual love is real, but carnal love is unreal. But at the same time, it expands the field, because whereas what we mostly understand love to be, we being in a cultural sense, being between human beings and romantic and around procreating or around satisfying like our personal desires for belonging or for affection. But there's also a love that takes more abstract forms, like where you love humanity, or you love animals, or you love nature, or you love God, or you love the infinite. And then where does that love actually happen? Is it just an idea, or where does it actually happen? And I think that that's where, like, love can be a lot more, than we maybe kind of assume it to be, or assume it should be. And
well, I think the kind of love you're talking about demands that this is the way I feel about it. It actually demands that I'll use a Wilbur word, transcend and include, or include and transcend. Carnal love is not bad or in itself, but the love you're talking about is saying, but that's not enough. There's more than that.
Yep. Can we take it higher?
Higher. But you made a good point that I think that that's been on the site, is this whole notion of how structures get put in a hierarchy that I'm influenced by Wilbur, but other people, even Gebser, a hierarchy that is too rigidified, and they don't see there's not an acceptance of the porousness that flows through the structures. There's porousness. Mentally, I think that's what we're doing. If I understand right, we solidify the concepts of the hierarchy.
Yeah, I think so. And then we interpret experience according to those concepts. And so we say this experience is better than that experience because it is a higher experience. This object is more worthy of love than this other one because it's more complex, or it's more more conscious, or more developed. So there are a lot of implications to like the metaphysics, the metaphysics of love.
My edge of the metaphysics, I'm just riffing off of that term. Edge of the metaphysics, personal experience I'm coming from, is always this anxiety producing that puts up the barriers of actually being okay with openness. Everything you described of going to the next level, it's not about whether we go higher or not, it's how open are we to the next level, no matter where we're going with the next level. I mean, I've done more going to the next level by going deep rather than high, in a sense.
Yeah.
But it's just a flip side, but I just feel better going deep. I don't know how to interpret that, but I'm just telling you that's been my.
Yeah, I resonate with that. Speaking personally, I like going deep and going high. And
okay,
so there's something.
That's cool.
There's not.
I may have a fear of heights. Is why I don't go high.
Not necessarily at the same time.
Yeah,
But
I hope not. I hope not.
yeah, that would be kind of unusual. But I you know, I don't want to, maybe I shouldn't even try to generalize, but insofar as, I mean, I think technology and everything that we're doing with like technology and in the modern world
Hmm.
is an attempt to go very high.
Yeah.
In essence, it's attempt to get away as far away as possible, actually, from Earth and from ground and from smell and stink and
And basically defy gravity.
yeah, totally.
Defy
And
gravity.
yeah, and there's something I think noble in that. Like there's something erotic in that,
Oh,
right? I mean, just
most
like
definitely.
a spaceship shooting off Earth, you know, into this void. It's very phallic, and it's very exciting, and there's thrust and incredible combustion of
Yeah.
energy involved.
I think we need to, just jumping in here, I think without that image works fine with me, but I think we're on the cutting edge of realizing how much the feminine has an active eroticism that we need to kind of take on board as much as the phallic.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the receptivity, the erotic receptivity to want to go further. I think there's you have to be receptivity. I'm going back to my notion of this edge of to move beyond. You know, well, some of the reasons we don't move on is because we're working with these instilled safety guards that aren't totally, that doesn't mean they're not legitimate, but
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you have to challenge the legitimate. Like me, I've challenged myself physically, emotionally from that place of always working with that edge. Is it time for me to go beyond? I hitchhiked across country all by myself. I went in the military. I did things that I know at the time I wasn't as conscious, but now I can look back that that's what was happening to me, if that makes sense. I was
Mm-hmm.
challenging and it wasn't always pretty. This is the imperfection part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but we have to. I mean, I think that's part of I mean, if there are, to the degree that we could describe the forces of the cosmos in masculine and feminine terms,
Yeah.
which we don't have to. We can say they're yin and yang, or, you know, which I guess, you know, one might translate as more masculine, more feminine.
Yeah. Right.
But we could make up a totally different language for it, I guess is my point.
Yeah.
Like Ursula Le Guin does. Like
Yeah.
she creates a universe where the terms mean something different, or there are different terms in a language that never existed, and that point to what I'll just call energies, or the dynamics, or the aspects, or the qualities, and there being an active, a challenging, a pressing, a focused, an intensifying energy or quality, and there being a receptive, an open, a fluid, a embracing, more nurturing kind of quality, and those being aspects of the universe in a way, like not just of ourselves as humans, and not just constructs that we've sort of imposed on the universe, but like they are self-arising, and then in human beings they take the particular forms of what we call men and women and children and butch and femme, and whatever other languages that we use, but there's something deeper there going on.
And how I experienced what you just went through is, and this is the way I experienced language as a whole, your use of language, my sensation is using language to go beyond language.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the way you just laid that out of trying, you know, Ursula coming up with a new language to describe something that's there, but maybe unhook or kind of just have different words just for the purposes, because, you know, language, we have habitual baggage with the way we use language. And I, like Alan Watts used to say, that you need a little bit of the hair of the dog that bit you. He was an alcoholic. So, you know, he'd get up in the morning after a drunk and he'd take a swig of alcohol and then he felt fine, you know?
Well, whatever works for you. But like the language, it has what I think it is, what's going on is that our language has metaphysics in it.
Yes, yes.
And so when we use language in ways that are prescripted or prescriptive,
Yeah.
that are non-reflexive, that are
Right.
just that we're often enacting the metaphysics that's embedded in the language without knowing it.
Instead of embracing a poetic use of language.
I would, yeah, I absolutely. I mean, that to me is what poetry is. It's rewiring like the source code of language to often to suit the poet's purposes, like to suit the poet's purpose for aesthetic experience or for harmony.
Mhm.
I find that if I use language that is running or enacting a kind of violent metaphysics,
Mm.
or a kind of objectifying metaphysics, or a separative
Mhm.
metaphysics, then I end up feeling reduced. I feel conflicted. I feel it in my body. So
So that's the physical part of language, not just the metaphysical. It's there's
totally.
a physicality that's I'm just coming bringing that back on board with the word metaphysical.
Oh, there totally is. You're right. I mean, maybe metaphysical is not even a great word because it sort of implies that that we're beyond the physical. And
Yeah, exactly.
but I find that the language that I have running that is actually vibrating my body, because when I speak, like right now, I'm vibrating, right?
Exactly.
Like there's vocal cords here, but
Your
also
energy is vibrating. Your
right.
energy is vibrating.
And the words and the what they add up to, what they express, that's the physics of the metaphysics, right?
Okay.
Like
Okay.
that's so I'd say metaphysics. Perhaps we could say that it transcends and includes physics,
Okay.
rather than it is an alternate realm or some non-physical
Ooh, I like that.
realm.
I like that. I like that way you put that. Definitely.
Okay, so but I forgot what I was talking.
Oh,
We were
I'm
talking
sorry.
about poetry and language and like what
Poetics, the
poetry is
poetics,
doing.
yeah.
Because I think, okay, for me, poetry and love are are um, joined. That like poetry is love in
Yes.
words,
Right.
and you know that there's a lot of bad poetry, just like there's a lot of bad love. But
Yeah.
in another sense, no love and no poetry is bad. It's uh, it's just just what is arising in that moment for the poet.
I'm glad you said that. I'm glad you said that. Yeah.
uh, from a mental, like canonical perspective, you can rank poets and say Shakespeare is great, and Weird Al Yankovic is pretty. He's actually very clever, but you know what I mean. Like we can apply mental categories, but I think for in the actual experience, like
Can
as
I
like a
take a moment and
phenomenologist.
can I take a moment and ask you a question about this before I lose my train of thought? Is that okay?
Totally. Yeah, please.
Do we have any works of Shakespeare before he was a great barb? Of what he was like before he became so, great? I mean, this is what I'm thinking with what you said about something about not getting my hearing was that not so caught in good and bad because I at the coffee shop we have artists come in and then some people come in, they're they have this training, but they see somebody that's just coming out and they won't just respect the level that they're coming from at this point in time in their life. I mean, I just
Mm-hmm.
this is part of, you understand what I'm trying to say is how people.
Let me offer
Okay.
because it ties back, I think, to what I was
Okay.
also trying to say, and the relation between poetry and love and language,
Yes. Yes.
and uh, and also the mental,
Okay.
because we can judge poetry just like we judge people: hot, not hot, attractive, not
Fair
attractive,
enough. Fair
etc.
enough.
Right?
Fair enough.
But when one is in love,
Hmm.
when one feels love, there isn't that kind of comparative analysis.
Mm-mm.
Like something is shining forth as, and this is what was so cool to me about that podcast, the Weird Studies podcast that I posted about on beauty.
Yeah.
It's like something is shining forth as it is, and it's
Yeah.
beautiful, and that like evokes love. That
Mhm.
that is not even, it's just all united a priori, like with the experience of love. Like love is the natural response to
Okay.
beauty.
Okay.
And so when we use language that has a kind of ugly metaphysics built
Mhm.
into it, a metaphysics that makes our bodies do things
Mhm.
that are ugly,
Mhm.
violent, abusive, um, insensitive to the splendor, of
Mhm.
creation, like that
Right.
is just given to us. Like any beautiful thing is a gift. And I think that part of what poetic language does is that it illuminates all those gifts around us.
Okay.
And it could be a person, it could be a bee, it could be some abstraction like that also has a beauty to it. And so I feel that when we do like poetry, like, and not as poets, quote unquote poets, but like anyone who's like attending to something with love,
Mhm.
like, and relating to it in its beautiful being, in its
Mhm.
being as an expression and emanation of beauty, like that is poetic. That is essentially a poetic being, a poetic
Okay.
way of being. And that's also where the way, like the language that we use becomes free of sort of like ugly metaphysics. I think is because we enact beauty,
Mm.
and then our language will follow. Like our language will not feel comfortable dividing things up into a priori categories. Uh, it will look for what is the natural and unique and appropriate expression in the moment.
Mhm.
And maybe that's not even words. Maybe it's a flower that's handed to the
Right.
beloved. Maybe it's
Right.
to bring in another thread, the parenting. Like it's an act of setting boundaries,
Right.
and taking the sort of pain on of setting boundaries, because for a parent, that's you want to be your kid's friend. You don't want to be the
Yeah, you have to
enforcer.
work. You have to work with that issue. In my experience, um, you have to work with that issue actually all through life. Um I have my children are 34. My son is 34, and my daughter is 27. And I went through the age where too much the hippies tried to be friends with their children and not live with structures. Children do need structures, especially early on, not restrictive ones, but they need boundaries so that they can grow, like anything. But at a certain point, especially when they entered their teen years, like 14, I had to readjust. And now I'm not necessarily their friend, but I'm a parent with friendliness towards them as individual. Does that make sense? That's how I've had to relanguage, because part of friendliness is how do I express the deep care I have for my child, but as a parent, let go. They're not my children.
Hmm.
They belong to something larger than me,
Hmm. Yeah.
as Kabal Kubran talks about.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Your children are not, they come through you, but
yeah,
they do not belong to you.
yeah, they don't belong to you, and that's a hard one especially in this culture, American culture. I'm just being specific to really reflect on that. Really reflect on that. And what that means and how it does it. It's a kind of grieving. There's a grieving aspect to letting go of the mentalization of being a parent. You got to grieve the loss of that role.
Yeah. Well,
In a sense.
you're a bit ahead on that path. I'm in the thick of that
Yeah,
role.
you're in the thick of it, but maybe it will help you as you go through it.
uh, yeah. I mean, part of that's the balance. I think that, I mean, in all love, in a way, like in love, when there's any other, there's like the balance between attachment and differentiation, maybe,
Yes, right.
right? And like allowing the other enough space to be who they are, yet having enough intimacy that you can influence each other and you could be yourselves, like be yourselves even more fully in relationship than you would be alone. Like you were speaking about your ex, how you wouldn't be who you are without her being a part of your life.
Yeah. I want to just float this in as we're talking, that you bring up the word balance and beauty, and a bit. This goes to the wabi sabi notion of there's this asymmetrical energy that we're working with all the time. Not that there's a balancing going on, but even when it's in perfect balance, my experience, even when it appears to be in perfect balance, one pole is just a little bit there to actually bring balance. One pole is just doing its job a little bit better, whether that's whatever side.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's been my experience, that there's no perfect, you know, symmetrical in my lived experience. Maybe it's somewhere else, you know.
The God realm perhaps has perfect forms, perpetual motion machines, free energy. They've transcended entropy.
It's like with my ex-wife. When we were working good, it was me being sensitive and being aware. This is the time for her to give space for her to guide the unity, not me. And then another time, you know what? That's why I describe it as symmetrical. You know,
yeah, that's really good, because the ideal of balance and even that symbol of the yin yang.
Yeah.
You know, that perfect circle.
Yeah.
With though that does show gradations and that does show entanglement, so it's a really nice symbol in that sense.
Okay.
But the perfect circle, or the idea of a perfect circle or a perfect balance, two poles that are perfectly sort of keeping each other like in mutual orbit. It's it's unrealistic. It's more of a mental idea, and there is always that wabi sabi, like that element of decay, that sort of decay factor. And then what I like about that aesthetic, the wabi sabi aesthetic, I saw your post about it too. And when I first moved to Colorado, I had a book on wabi sabi. And
cool.
Photography, I think from Japan, and black and white, and these beautiful images that they capture like the beauty of asymmetry.
Yeah.
You know, they capture the beauty of that decay, and the life even in death, or in processes of decomposition. It's like the understated beauty. It's like the subtle beauty. It's not the flashy, showy golden sunset, or the flower that's perfectly in bloom. It's like the flower that's just beginning to wilt, and or maybe it's completely wilted, except for like one petal, and you still see the blush of rose on the petal.
And also I use it. It's interesting. I'm using a part of my mental, bringing up asymmetrical, to actually challenge how my mental faculty gets habituated to seeing or feeling things in a static sense. Asymmetry helps me maintain the dynamic, but at the same time, the aesthetic that you just painted.
Yeah.
It's the mental has so much, in my experience and hard experience, and going through trauma, because I did go through a period of hypervigilance of knowing this mental wanting to not face into the dynamic. I want it to stay this way. I don't want to experience going over the edge in a tractor and almost losing my life. I was hyper focused on that not happening. Even in the smallest, my ex-wife or even my children sometimes could trigger a response because I wasn't in touch with what was happening, you know, the side effects from my accident.
Yeah, totally. And that hyperactivates the mental specifically
Yes,
because you're
yes,
scanning, you're
yes,
looking, you're narrow focusing. You want
yes.
to kind of like know what's around you. Like
Hypervigilance,
that's right.
hypervigilance
That's right.
versus heightened awareness. There's two different phrases that have slightly qualitative differences in my experience. Heightened awareness is not the same as hypervigilance.
And receptivity is another kind of quality, you know, that
Yes,
could be
yes,
very open to phenomena, stimuli, signals,
yeah,
messages, but is also soft
yes.
and is not kind of on like a hair trigger, like to, you know, to
Definitely.
defend or to attack the, you know, the threat.
Exactly. That's exactly what I had to relearn with and actually redevelop in a way my relationship to my defense system that had been blown out of the water. I had to
Yeah.
reacquaint myself with my defense system. Unfortunately, at this time in history, there's so much neuroscience, there's so much work of understanding how trauma sets the brain in certain states that
Mm-hmm.
I was fortunately helped along. There was a big part that had to do with reading Waking the Tyrant, with reading, using the mental exercise of reading new language about what my condition was. And then I had supplemented it with actual practices like swimming in a pool. Uh, I had acupuncture, you know, making it a multi-modality approach was very
Mm-hmm.
important to help me. And it took roughly to move from the accident was in 2000. It took 5 years of just going through this. And in that 5 years, Mario, I had about 5 or 6 friends die. I ended up divorced. I mean, I was still going through almost ongoing trauma, but there was this thread of that was helping me work with it in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
That,
And you're also doing mindfulness practice. Is that when this
mindfulness,
came, you began?
you know, mindfulness practice was very much an aspect of, but it was a combination of centering, prayer, and Zen, Zazen, those two
Mm-hmm.
practices. But then, and then now because of the body work, it's more, I do a lot more, it's walking meditation. I do minimum sitting. I will sit, you know, I know, but only usually for 10 to 20 minutes. Most of my
Mm-hmm.
meditation, because of probably just trying to get reacquainted with my body and realizing everybody has a different, well, I'm kinetic. That's
Mm-hmm.
another thing I realized how important I needed. I wasn't in touch with that part of my nature,
Mm-hmm.
how kinetic I was.
Yeah, totally. And that happens to like a lot of kids too, that they're very kinetic, but that doesn't fit with the
School,
curriculum.
with
Yeah, doesn't fit
school.
with the school curriculum. And so
Yeah,
it gets like, it gets beat out of them, or it gets like, it gets kind of,
that's what Aaron Manning and you guys, when you did that, I mean, that just, I posted that just like, wow, okay. Her
mm-hmm.
work and understanding that kind of, you know, having again new perspectives on how to relate to our bodies, and how everybody's body is different, as much as, you know, the human body has these general things, but everybody is experiencing their own body in a different way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the trauma that you personally experienced, you know, there's your part of that, right? Like no
Yeah,
one else experienced that.
no,
But there is also, I believe, more of a shared traumas that we have, like collective traumas
this is
that,
true. This is
you know,
true.
that happen more to groups or to nations or to communities or to families, you know,
Yes,
and then we carry that too. And
yes,
then I think we also have like species level trauma. You know,
What
that
level?
species
Oh,
level
yes,
trauma.
yes.
That there are traumatic events that are really, really deep, so deep, like in our species
Hmm.
history, or that we can't really remember them except in mythological terms,
Yes.
uh, and and maybe not even there. Like that, there are even deeper traumas that are kind of pre-mythological, that are
Hmm.
more like in the archaic mind,
Hmm.
but they are formative. Like they're kind of in our core in some way, and we can't fully grok them, but we're
Hmm.
like living them out. I mean, you think, just to be how many times as tribal humans, tribal proto-humans, right?
Hmm.
Were, did we encounter wild animals? Did we encounter starvation,
Other humans that
plague,
wanted to hurt us, other humans that wanted to hurt us.
other humans, and maybe other entities, right?
Yes, yeah, right,
Like it, and that, that then shapes our, like, we responded to that
right.
in some ways, and those encounters were probably formative. They were formative for how we shaped our
I
sense
would
of
say, I
ourselves,
would say so. Yeah,
right, and our sense of how we want to live with others, and
yeah,
how we relate to the world, the natural world, and to other, like, beings that are similar to us, other humanoid beings,
yeah, right.
and like how much of that is like driving us unconsciously, like even like into the modern world where we have gained certain technological powers, like powers over matter, but
Hmm.
we're driven by like archaic and ancient, like trauma drives, like trauma responses. Then
Right,
that, I mean, that's just like one layer. That's just like the kind of geological layer of it. But
right,
it's part of why I think, like, these are all interrelated. We've been jumping around in this
yeah,
conversation, like
right.
almost just like madly jumping around, but they're all, I think, interrelated. Like they're part of a cluster that comes together: love, trauma,
Yeah,
sex, war, and
yeah,
beauty,
yeah,
and death.
yeah.
And th- it's like each time we experience like trauma, each time we
Hmm.
experience death, it changes the way that we love. It changes what we feel is beautiful.
Sure,
Uh,
sure.
and I mean, there's a sort of deepening effect, I think, of
Mhm.
trauma that is processed. I'll say that like a Canadian, processed. um, just kind of like a deeper sense, forward sense, like that. And there's another effect of trauma that is not processed, that is dissociated from, that is like
Yeah.
still a
So
sort of
there's
active
so there's
driver.
basically this polarity that trauma that we can view trauma with. There's this polarity, a sort of polarity. One, in a sense, if I hear you right, so correct me.
Mhm.
Trauma can be looked at as fucking growing pains, growing beyond what we've come to accept as the status quo. And
Mhm.
then the other pole is, well, how do we respond to that? The pole is that we don't always respond good to that.
Yeah,
We
we respond in ways that
Yeah.
intensify, that cause more trauma.
And that's why a lot of my understanding is that if we begin to look at trauma and not, I mean, we have to like you did this, you jumped, we've been jumping over, but shamanically learning that you can shake loose trauma if you accept that it's part of life.
Mm-hmm.
That we have technology on so many levels, but shamanically and neuroscience to understand that part of our biggest problems, this is one of the core issues of life, is how do we learn to respond when life fucks up, or when life takes us on there's no perfect. I don't think we can make a formula of how to respond, but we can bring some awareness that when this happens, like in what they're doing for vets or any trauma person, like Peter Levine and different people working with somebody else just was bringing a notion that trauma can actually bring in a component that is transformative if we think of it that way.
Mm-hmm.
If we think of it that way, therefore, if we think of it as transformative, given everything that you said, like there's a lot of species unconscious trauma in us. That's a fact. But where I'm at in my understanding of trauma, it's more about, you don't have to be Freud and dig down deep and dig up all that shit. You just sit on the edge and let it come up, and you've trained yourself how to be with it as it comes up. Part of the problem is we're so busy trying to keep it down, we don't learn how to let it come up and show ourselves, train ourselves to be with it. And then it goes, okay, you give me plenty of attention. I'm not, and I'm gone. I'm not gonna make your life miserable.
Yeah. But otherwise, the Freudian part of it that is relevant, I think, is that return of the repressed.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So at a certain point, we kind of have to face our trauma, or we have to let what trauma come. And
well, and don't you
I feel like
the mental is a big component if we're going to change, because it's the mental. That's part of what happens with trauma. My experience is the mental became so hyper to protect, which I can understand, but it's doing its fucking job too well.
Mm-hmm.
If I can say it that way.
Yeah.
Because it loses touch with the poetic, the love, the deep affective part that is larger than the trauma.
Yeah.
That you talk about,
Yeah. This is, I think what it is with poetry, like, here's one way I might differentiate good and bad poetry, or like poetry that I enjoy and poetry that I don't.
Yeah.
Is poetry can be not formally that complex or that fancy, but if there's like that seed of openness, love, like if you can feel the other person there, like feel them, then there's something good about it, and when I feel like poetry is bad, is that it's either formulaic or it's like mentally contrived.
Now, is that coming from you or another poet?
Myself, if I read something that I've written, and if I feel like
somebody else, or somebody else.
Yeah, like I've gone to a few poetry readings lately, and so I've also been talking with Andrew Field, who is a critic. He's bringing that perspective of judgment, like of saying this is good, this is not so good, and here's why. So it's not like judgmentalness. It's like an aesthetic function of like recognizing like where is real quality, and where what kind of efforts are not fully there yet. And that's the truth. I mean, in a way, a poem has a function just like this chair that I'm sitting on. Like if this chair fell over and broke, I wouldn't say it's a good chair. And if a poem didn't make me feel something, didn't give me a sense for another person's point of view, or for some sort of meaningful experience, then I would say it's not a good poem. It doesn't work.
Right.
So the aesthetics there have something to do with like the quality of being that is encoded in or embedded in the language. And like what we're talking about with trauma and kind of that edge, that edge where we're not just kind of spilling our guts all over the floor, and where like there's a kind of asymmetrical balance, between openness and there is a need for defensiveness or defense. Where as organisms, we certainly have an immune system that has to, at the microscopic level or at the microbiological level, literally form a defense, like destroy,
all the
invasive cells.
Down,
all the way
into your cells, they have a defensive system.
Exactly, and that I would posits, it goes all the way up to our thoughts and ideas, and
Yes.
the memes that we carry, and the sort of, the meanings that we host.
Right.
And in some ways, like, our bodies become hosts for ideas and
Yes.
memes. And so the kinds of poetry, the kinds of philosophy, the kinds of science, like the stories we use to tell other stories, as Donna Haraway says, the ideas we use to explain other ideas, the
Right.
metaphysics we use to interpret our metaphysics, like, those really matter because they are forming they're part of our subtle body, essentially. They're part of that, that subtler aspect of our being.
Yeah.
And so this is why I think the criticism is important. Like, it's
Oh
good
no,
to host.
okay.
Right?
I'm not disagreeing that there should be criticism. I didn't mean to paint that picture if I did.
Oh no, I didn't mean to say that you were painting that picture.
Okay.
I was more, trying to bring together, like, what Andrew Field sort of, or like as a critic,
Right.
what they bring to a conversation compared to, like, say, the poet or the lover, who is maybe not concerned with whether their production is good or bad.
No, and
right?
that's a legitimate and that's a fair point. And I think that's something that's not understood, is that there is a place for the critic. I've read the thread of Andrew and you and talking, and you guys going back and forth, and I'm fully on board with that. I guess I just want to put in what I'm sensing for myself about this edge and see how that plays with what you're saying. Maybe it's, in my experience, the inner critic that I know that I was influenced through my parents was nothing that I did was worth being, everything was criticized to the nth degree, where I couldn't develop. Instead of, they could be good critics, if I can play that, of nurturing forward a process of our aesthetic versus squishing it with their over the top you use a good word, judgmentalness. Judgmental, not discerning judgment, which some people don't like, but I'm always questioning people trying to shove down my throat this non-judgmental attitude, and I said, well, that's a big judgment.
Right.
Because
you're judging that non-judgmentalment is better than judgmentalness.
Yeah, and I tell them, you know what? Look, when are you going to get real? Non-judgment, if you're going to use it, means you appreciate the judgment and deal with the judgment from a non-judgment. Don't try to polarize it. Give me some honest, I'm going to hear your judgment. I mean, I've had to face people that they're judging me, and I finally got to the point that I'm going, okay, I'm going to take issue. I'm taking your judgment to the Court of Appeals. This is my side of it. This is my side of it. I heard your side, but it's actually I'm trying to find a language where non-judgment and judgment are a polarity we need to learn to work with. Judgmentalness and non-judgment they shouldn't exist together.
Yeah. And the word criticism is, maybe it's not as helpful a word. Discernment is a good word, for example.
Yeah. Criticism has a lot of baggage that in this day and age, that post-Trump, Yeah.
I mean, in a way, everybody's a critic.
Yeah.
And in another way, like the real aspect of discernment that should be part of criticism isn't always cultivated in people's
and the way
critical
I was taught
modes.
That discernment, I got enlightened by a Christian of showing that discernment is a skillful use of judgment. He was countering the use of even Christians being judgmental and trying to say, no, you need to practice discernment, a discerning judgment, not a judgmental condemnation judgment. Therefore, you're actually, what a lot of non-judge people don't even want to hear in the same sentence is, there is a place for judgment, damn it. There's a place for it.
Yeah. Yeah, we've talked about the critic, the realist, and the dreamer,
Yeah.
and maybe the poet or the lover is more aligned with the dreamer archetype, and the critic, that they're represented there in that trilogy. But there's also the realist, who sort of maybe mediates between the two,
Okay.
and keeps the critic kind of in check, and almost like is the sounding board, for the discernment. Like, is the criticism, is the judgment proportionate? Is it appropriate?
Yes.
Is it,
yes. If it's
is it
proportionate.
and then also for the dreamer, can this dream be realized? Like, is it just fancy, or will it enter into dialogue, with the concrete, with the real, with the
I
actual?
like that. I like that, because if I heard the way those words right, the realist is not dismissing the dream, but it wants to know, well, how do we bring that out? If I
That's
heard
right.
you right.
Yeah,
So
that's
the
right.
realist doesn't dismiss the dream, but they're real in the sense that, okay, but there's another step, kind of.
Yeah. This is, if we were, Genpo Roshi, the
Yeah,
big
yeah,
mind
yeah,
process.
yeah, yeah.
I imagine we could recreate that sort of ad hoc, and have, speak to the realist, speak to the critic,
Yes,
speak to the
that's
dreamer.
a perfect example. Yes, the voice dialogue, big mind.
Yeah, the voice dialogue. That's right. Because I imagine the realist, if he or she or they were friendly to the dreamer, would be curious. Like, how does your dream expand my reality?
Yes, yes.
And maybe would ask, I might, as the realist, I might ask the critic, how is my sense of reality flawed or wrong, or or illusory? What is real? What is really real?
Right.
Where, and then we could take different roles and kind of have a dialogue that way.
Yeah, and I'd like to ask the realist, what is it about the critic and the dreamer you have problems with?
Yeah. Like, that
just to bring it around to really hear the realist point of view of those two voices.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the way I understand voice dialogue is opening up and hearing the layers each voice might bring that sometimes we're not listening to, or we ignore. The tonal quality. There's multiple tones, or
Yeah, and also, yeah, and where we're stepping on each other's tones. Like, like lay off, critic. We're getting, we're enjoying this reality. Like, why do you have to squat?
You can come in tomorrow morning. I don't need you right now.
Right.
I'm trying to have sex, damn it. Come on.
Yeah. So I wanted to say too, like, on language, just a couple notes. I'm kind of backtracking a bit, but
good.
Like, there are other languages. You talked about the 5 love languages. I forgot the author's name, but we have that book. And I know one of the languages is touch. One of the languages is language.
Yes.
Talking.
Yeah.
Another language is just doing things, being present, right?
Yeah.
And in other cultures too, there are other words for what we call love, but that don't have the same baggage. Like in Buddhist tradition, one may speak of loving kindness, or of compassion.
Right.
We might speak of empathy or sympathy, in different discourses. And in a way, they're all forms of love, or they're forms of eros, or they're forms of, like, affinity, or they're forms of that, like, that energy, that of attraction between things. Right. And so I guess part of what I'm reflecting on, like, as we're kind of into this cafe, and also paying attention to the time, I'd like to actually end in 10 minutes, like at the bottom of the hour, if that's okay, so that we're going.
That's no problem. I've enjoyed the conversation up to this point, and I was wondering how long we might go, so no problem.
Yeah, I thought in my mind that I'd like to go like 90 minutes or so, if it was just going to be up to us, and I had a say in it.
Yeah.
Often we go 2 hours, but I find that kind of is more tiring to go, like the last 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Or it's harder to transition to other things. Like I need more time to recover.
Thank you for bringing it up and letting me know. That's fine.
Sure. And that's mainly a function of my own schedule and like how I have to like regiment my time.
Totally necessary as far as I'm concerned.
As a parent, particularly, we like I came to the cafe from homeschool time in the morning, and so that has been a big change for me, is getting onto a more regular schedule and like channeling my love.
Channeling.
Like, yeah,
you got it, babe. You got it.
Like I had to have a little dialogue between the critic and the lover and the realist, because we have these ideals. We want to homeschool our kids. I want to write poetry. I want to be part of this cosmic adventure with that we're all on, and but it has to work, like day to day, morning to night. It just has to work, and if it doesn't, then there's got to be a dialogue between the three. Like the critic's going to come in and say, like, what's going on, buddy? You said you want to do X, Y, and Z, but you're not actually performing.
Right.
And like, maybe you need to pare it down. Like maybe that we need to give the dreamer a haircut. So it's just like, I don't know, like it's been cool to have a space to explore the asymmetries.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you for introducing that language. That's part of one of the things that I like about doing this, is that it shakes up the language, kind of shakes out the traumas.
And I think this maybe this is my rough, ragged skillfulness of the poetic, because I do think that I'm not putting myself down. I just know that I'm a kind of ragged, skillful, poetic person. I love, if I can put it this way, I'll quote Suzuki Roshi. I practice beginner's mind, Zen mind with language in the moment. In the moment. Because that's where I can test the language I have accrued, but also maybe listen to others and then bat that ball back and forth.
Cool. I've enjoyed it, and I'm curious. I want to ask you if we can kind of bleed into outside of the cafe and outside of this virtual space. Like, what do you have going on today? What's next for you?
Actually, I'm just hanging out. I'm going to go to lunch. I'm waiting at 4:00. At 4:00, my sister's coming to pick me up, and I'm going to go house set her 2 little dogs in Banning. And I'll have the use of a car, which I can't drive too far, but I can at least drive because I usually ride the bus. And I can't drive the car too far because I won't have gas money, but I can at least get out of the house and go to Starbucks and have a cup of coffee. So, and what I like about it, so where I live with these 2 other guys, this is Riverside, Banning's about 30 miles away. It changes up my environment, and I love I actually embrace being challenged by going to different environments and adjusting. It's how I feel I work with that edge that we talked about, of the asymmetry of finding balance.
Yeah, that's nice. Cool.
That's what I got going. So
yeah, cool. Are you near the beach?
Yes, I'm actually 45 minutes away from the beach. That's one thing I like about Riverside, where I'm at. Where we're located, we're in a lower desert, mountains, and beach. So I've always had desert, mountains, and beach near me.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, it's nice to be able to switch environments or ecologies.
And in
like
fact,
that.
I'm getting. Maybe I need to borrow some money because I want to go to the beach since I have a car. I need to borrow some money so I can go to the beach.
Yeah.
San Diego's only 2 hours away, or I prefer San Diego, but Huntington Beach or Newport Beach, Laguna is down there, and it's actually the weather, because I can feel fall coming in. The weather is cooler, and the temperature, even though it's hot, it doesn't have the same intensity as July.
Yeah.
So
I'm pining. Maybe one day. I can't complain though. It's beautiful here, but I grew up on the East Coast, and the beaches are definitely different there. I think the West Coast beaches are nicer, and the
So
Pacific has a
you've
different.
been to the West Coast beaches? Whereabouts?
I've been on the boardwalk in San Diego.
Cool.
Yeah,
Cool.
and I've been on the beach in Oregon. I did a road trip in 2015,
Oh,
and I went up through Idaho, Montana,
oh,
into
oh,
Washington.
God, that's a
Stayed with a
beautiful
buddy
trip.
in Seattle,
That's a
and then I
beautiful
went
trip.
north to Vancouver, and then I
Yeah.
came down like how is it Highway 1 that hugs
Yeah.
the coast there?
Or the five. If you came to the coast, it's Highway 1.
Maybe 5 or 1, but
1 is the coast, 5 is down the center of the state.
so 1.
Yeah.
And along, the Washington, Oregon coasts,
Yeah.
and it's so gorgeous.
Isn't
And
it?
you have these cliffs,
Yeah.
uh, and then one morning I stopped. I think it was more or less kind of the border between Washington and Oregon, and there's a beach there, and I camped and
Mm.
went out to the beach. It was still cool. It was still cold, but I kind of just had this. I just sort of baptized myself
Oh,
in the
nice.
beach, in the
Did you come
water.
down through California on the one at all?
And then, I was going to a conference in Sonoma, so
Oh,
I
okay.
I, I
Okay.
didn't actually hit the coast in California. I think I veered inwards.
Did you go to
Yeah,
the Indigo conference in
it was in
Sonoma?
2015. Yeah, it was the
Yeah. Okay.
2015. It was the last one there.
Okay.
Yeah, and that was the road trip I took. It was a wonderful time, and
Oh, beautiful.
and then in El Salvador, my mother's from El Salvador, and the last time I was there was almost 20 years ago. But those beaches are on the Pacific and totally
Yeah.
totally gorgeous.
Just a side note, because I've heard a lot of things with El Salvador politically.
There's a huge problem with violence.
Yeah. Okay.
And talk about collective trauma.
Yeah.
The brief history of El Salvador is that, it was a colonial state of Spain up until, the decolonization of the early, 20th century. And, but El Salvador came to be ruled by an oligarchy, kind of it was literally about 13 families.
Wow.
And, like other Latin American countries, kind of went through these cycles of despots, and and also and then a kind of counter reaction to that of revolutionary movements.
Sure.
So, as in Nicaragua, as in Cuba, as in Chile, Colombia, they're through the 20th century, from the really 20s all the way on, 60s, 70s were more intense. There were insurgencies, and the United States had a role to play in all this,
the
in
CIA
terms of its
and
foreign,
everything.
in terms of its foreign policy. There's plenty of written on this. Chris Hedges was a reporter in El Salvador in the 80s. He was a war reporter there. There's a great movie called Salvador that has Woods. What's his name? Not Bob Woods, the actor, Charlie Woods or something. But anyway, and the problem, though, is that there was a peace accord in 1993, I believe it was. I was there when there was a civil war through the 80s in El Salvador.
Yeah, right.
Just like in Nicaragua, there was. Except the difference being, in Cuba and in Nicaragua, there were revolutionary movements which succeeded in toppling the government, succeeded in toppling the dictators. So in Cuba, you had Castro, for 50 years still, and in Nicaragua for at least a decade, you had the Sandinistas, who had overthrown the Somoza regime. There was 3 Somoza dictators of Nicaragua. But in El Salvador, that partly because of the United States propping up the government, that revolution didn't succeed. So you didn't have there were some really great benefits in Cuba and Nicaragua in terms of things like literacy, women's rights, education, economic and it's a story that's not often told, and it's against incredible odds because it's a kind of David and Goliath.
Yeah.
And in Nicaragua's case, they were undermined by U.S. foreign policy.
Yeah.
In Cuba, it's kind of more been a process of erosion. But in El Salvador, like those energies, like didn't have a chance to sort of express them. Like they didn't get a chance to sort of manifest something creative.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And so it's a darker place in a way. And after the war, there were many young men who were well trained in violence, but who didn't have opportunities. And the economic situation didn't like improve for most people.
Right.
So you still have these huge disparities. And now you have a lot, you have more weaponry, more guns, more, like there was a difference even in the gangs. Like in Nicaragua, I traveled around a lot. Like I met gang members and got to know them a little bit, but they had knives. They didn't have semi-machine guns, and they were still like young in a way. And there was just a different vibe actually. And I feel like El Salvador has a darker vibe. And I think it's partly because like it was like hope was quashed. And then after the war, a lot of, a combination of things, including the drug trade, including the CIA, but there were a lot of Salvadorians in jail in the United States because a lot had immigrated to, California, Texas, New York, and they like really learned how to be violent. It was like a PhD in violence.
I just want to be mindful of the time, but real quick. So I worked in a California young youth authority system in Whittier, and they had a maximum. They had barracks, and they had a maximum where the murderers and people were. And I would take them out. They would get to go outside and do. I was a groundskeeper. Well, one day, this is the only experience I've had with one young person, El Salvadorian, that was in there for murder because I think it's related to what you just said. He came up very violent and he threatened me. And fortunately, I understood the rules that all I had to do was call the support and send his ass back, and he was locked down for I don't know how long. But that was an intense experience.
Yeah.
That young man didn't give a shit. He was, I just experienced, it's just, I just, God.
There's something in the eyes. Like there's something,
it's the eyes.
It's something just almost like your humanity is not even seen.
Exactly.
And that's scary. That's actually scary because that's like a monster.
It's sad. That's in a child. That's in a child.
Yeah. Well, long story short is that a lot of those kids were sent back to El Salvador.
Oh,
and
wow.
So the gang problem in El Salvador has exploded.
Oh,
and
wow.
like even in like my family there is basically middle class. But if you go into any middle class neighborhood, there's various extortion schemes. Usually they have to or they have to hire their own private security guards. Every house is surrounded in barbed wire. I kid you not.
Wow.
Everybody has built up their houses, and they put barbed wire around and big spikes and stuff. Like people like live in these these mini fortresses, because because it's become so frightening. I mean, my parents were assaulted like in their home. My aunt was like hijacked. Her car was hijacked. She was like practically kidnapped.
No.
One of kind of the friend of a cousin, or the kind of the brother of a cousin's wife was kidnapped. My uncle and aunt, who had like a little farm there, it's just, I haven't been back in quite a while because I don't you know, I don't feel like it's like I would go by myself, but I wouldn't really take my family there, because
right.
also as a white person, if you're seen to have money, whether or not you actually have money,
Right.
you will be a, you know, more of a target, and they'll do it on the bus, you know, they'll anywhere. It's not really, so it's not good. And at the same time, it's such a beautiful place, and so many beautiful people, and you know, I have so much I have a lot of family there. So it's sad, you know, I don't get to go back.
Right.
I will. I know that I will.
Okay.
And it's just a matter of time.
Yeah.
But it has been difficult, you know, for anyway, my mom and dad wanted to. I know we're going over time and stuff. My dad, they wanted to retire there, and finally, because of a combination of bureaucracy and I think, you know, maybe not feeling totally safe, I think they decided against it. And so but like I said, it's really beautiful, and it's really sad that like this, you know, history has just you know, scarred and just so traumatized an otherwise really one of the most beautiful places on earth, for sure.
Yeah. And just what it does to that kind of, not the land, but the humans that exist on it, their spirit, you know, what it does to their spirit, given the descriptions that you just gave. It's just, because, you know, that's an interesting tension for me, is how this kind of landscape beauty can coexist with humans in violence. That's that's kind of hard for me sometimes to actually feel into that big love space that we talked about.
Yeah, well, it's so, I mean, if anything is sacrilegious, I think that is. You know, shedding blood in what otherwise would be a paradise.
Yeah.
But this is an old story.
Yeah.
Very old story. So anyway,
thank you, my friend.
Thank you, Michael. It was great connecting with you. Great talking.
Yes, it's been really nice. What I appreciate is the one-on-one, because I've had one-on-one with the other members of the thing, and it's always enjoyable. I just want to check in just briefly, because have you had any contact with Mark at all? Is he okay?
I haven't.
Okay, that's all I need to know. I just, you know, I still like the guy.
Me too. I'm assuming I will hear from him at some point.
Okay.
Or we'll bump into each other or something.
Okay.
I'm feeling okay about it.
Now, okay. Yeah. Anyway, you have a good day.
I'm not in a rush. Like
you know, right. Right. Okay. You have a good day, my friend. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Yeah.